The new person. Is the new person here today?
It's Nolan.
Oh, Nolan's a new guy. Nolan, you are going to love this class. If you don't love this class more than you've ever loved any class, I've totally failed you, my man. Totally failed. I got to tell you guys a few things while we're waiting for the one person. Do you guys appreciate the effort I put into the technical aspects? Okay, I have a green screen. I have it perfectly lit. There are no flaws in the back. I changed my lighting. My son's a photographer and he helped me with the lighting. So do you notice the lighting's a little better?
Yeah.
And Nolan says yes, and he wasn't even here last time. But that's a good attitude. I appreciate your attitude, Nolan. Keep that up. Okay. The other difference is I'm wearing a tie and a shirt because two reasons. I really felt like being formal today because I haven't worn a tie for like over a year. Okay, so I thought, man, it's been a year. I ought to wear a tie again. And also, this is about the only thing I have that doesn't have green in it. When you run green screens, you can't wear clothing with any green. So that kind of is the reason for that. I'll tell you guys a story, though. Does anybody recognize the background, what I have going on in back of me? How many, raise your hand if you've been to Europe. Raise your hand if you've been to Europe. Nolan's been to Europe. He's the only one. And well, so you must recognize this, Nolan. You must recognize this background. You do? And you raised your hand, Kyle. Why don't you tell us what it is? You can type it in, by the way. Brianna's here. Everybody's saying hi. Okay, great. I'm reading this. Okay, so Kyle, Nolan, type in and tell me what it is. Would you guys rather speak into it and unmute or speak, or would you rather chat?
I've never been to London.
Unmute or speaker, just because it's easier.
Oh, you're gonna do the speaker? Unmute the speaker is fine with me. Okay. This is London, right? Everybody recognizes my background is London, right? If you don't recognize it, I'll tell you. This is London, and this is Parliament. And what is this thing called? What is the big clock there called? Okay, you're typing it in. Big Ben. Nolan, yes, Big Ben, right? Nolan, you were going to say. Okay, now, I got to tell you that I've been to Europe about a half dozen times. I've been to London, and I just want to share with you guys my heartfelt emotions when I went there, because my background, my ancestry is from England. But, you know, it's said that we go to Europe to be more American. And that sounds odd, but I believe that when I go to Europe, I'm more American. And I see this country in a different way. And I see things about America, about the United States, that I did not appreciate until I went. And I happened to walk right where this picture was about 6 years ago. We were there. And I walked, and here's what struck me. These buildings have been around there for about 900 years or so. It's been pretty developed for about 900 years. And as you walk the streets of London and you see Big Ben and you see the Parliament, you see Westminster Abbey, and you see this amazing country, you realize what an ancient civilization this was. But a powerful civilization, a civilization that reaches back centuries, not just in age, but in power. And as I walked the streets, what really struck me that I did not appreciate until that moment was the enormous courage that those men had when they wrote that nasty letter to George III called the Declaration of Independence. Because my friends, at that time, England was the most powerful military force in the world. And yet they wrote that letter, that Declaration of Independence, telling him where to go and what he could do when he got there. And they did that knowing that it would cause the wrath of the most powerful military force on earth. And it wasn't until I walked those streets that I really could appreciate the courage of those founding fathers to do what they did. So, you know, I just share that thought with you. But I have some exciting things. I have to tell you, I've been looking forward all week to talking this class and the kind of stuff we're going to do. And I've learned a lot about Zoom. But I'm going to start with sharing the screen here. And I'm going to share the sound. And do you remember the First Amendment? We went over the First Amendment together, right? What was the word, and you can type it in or you can unmute and tell me, what was the word that really struck you in the First Amendment?
Struck?
Chatting. People are chatting. I don't expect there to be any chatting, and I'll bring that up to Miss. I expect you guys to be here on time in the future, and if you're not, I don't know. I want you to say, I'm here on time, and I appreciate it if you guys would be. And I really expect you to be mentally present. Do you guys see me giving you tons of homework? Miss Gorley said, you don't want to give them tons and tons of homework. And what I said to her was, I won't give them tons of homework, but I expect them to be 100% mentally present when we meet. So I will make that deal with you that I won't give you a lot of homework, but you have to make a deal with me. You're going to be 100% here. Is that fair enough? Is everybody going to give me a thumbs up for that? Okay. No chatting. No chatting. Thank you, gentlemen. Okay, now, let me share, because I put some real thought into today. What is the word that jumped out at you as we went through the First Amendment? Did we go through the First Amendment last time? If we didn't, I can do it now. Did we? Okay. What is the word that's really relevant to our country today that jumps out from the First Amendment? It starts with a P, and why don't you type it in or just unmute and tell us what that word is?
Does struck mean like happy, like you like it, or like does it mean like furious?
There's a word. If you look, okay, do you guys have your little constitutions with you now? Okay, let me explain. Every single class, and I should have told you this last week and I forgot. Every single class, you're supposed to have your constitutions. Who does not have their constitution?
We didn't get them.
Okay, who does have their constitution? Everybody who doesn't have a constitution, can you go to Miss Gorley now and ask her to give you a constitution?
She's not here.
Oh. Who does have their constitution? Raise your hand if you have your constitution.
We can look it up.
Okay, in the future, I want you guys to get your constitutions from Miss Gorley and always have them with you when we start class. Okay, you know what? Don't worry about it because I'm going to look it up for you. I'm going to pull it up, okay? Everybody sees this now. Here's what we're going to do, okay? This is the First Amendment. What is this that jumps out at you guys? I need you to unmute and can everybody see that? Okay. Can everybody tell me what jumps out at you?
What jumps out is the churches. You can't they have freedom of religious thoughts, so you can be Christian, Catholic, Mormon, Muslim,
okay,
or whatever you want to be.
Okay, well, for what's really relevant to right now is we see the riots in Portland, the riots in Kenosha, the riots in Los Angeles, in Seattle, in New York, and in Chicago. My daughter in Chicago looked from her studio apartment and looked down on the street below, and people were looting and destroying a store. What is it in the First Amendment that speaks to those people today, ladies and gentlemen? What is it? What word? I've got it in italics. Can everybody see it?
Peacefully, peacefully, peacefully.
Peaceably, okay? Peaceably, very good. Okay, now, what I want you guys to do is to pay attention because I'm going to show you something that you're going to be stunned by, okay?
Now, too many see the protests as the problem. No, the problem is what forced your fellow citizens to take to the streets. Persistent and poisonous inequity.
Hey, can you guys hear this?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yes.
Okay, that's all I need to know. Just one person can say yes.
And injustice. And please, show me where it says that protests are supposed to be polite and peaceful.
Whoa, let me play that again.
Now, too many see the protests as the problem. No, the problem is what forced your fellow citizens to take to the streets: persistent and poisonous inequities and injustice. And please, show me where it says that protests are supposed to be polite and peaceful.
So could you show that to him?
First Amendment. First Amendment. First Amendment.
Okay. Now, can you guys believe that this guy goes online and he's a national commentator and he says, show me where it says we have to have peaceful protests? Right in the First Amendment. Is that amazing to you guys?
CNN, Communist News Network.
Well, I'm not going to call names to CNN, but certainly, he couldn't get away with that with probably most of the other networks. Unfortunately, there's only one he couldn't get away with that starts with it's Fox. But anyway, my question to you guys I have some things to share with you that I want us to walk through history. We're going to take a walk through history together. And I'm going to talk to you, frankly, about things that are not in a textbook that I wish I'd have been taught, things that are very relevant to today. So I want you guys to really be present because what I'm going to say is going to be relevant. How come, Wyatt, I don't see you? I just see a penguin. What's going on there? Oh, there, Wyatt, I want to just continue to see you, partner. Okay, thank you so much. Now, is there anything that we can learn from history that might speak to us during this pandemic? And can we just all have a frank, open discussion? Okay. Okay. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk to you all quite frankly about this pandemic and history and what we can learn and how it can speak to us and how we can grow in our knowledge and our connection to the past, and specifically speak to that pandemic. Can I do that? So I want us to pretend we're all just sitting around in a circle, and I want you to be totally present. Ben, look at me. So here's the story. I was in Europe. You've all heard of the Black Plague, the Black Death. How many people did that kill in Europe?
30 million?
I think a third. When I was your age, I was told it was a third, okay? And we don't know exactly.
It's not the Trojan.
Okay. I heard it was a third. I remember it being about a third. So when I was your age, I had a vision that meant it was evenly distributed, about a third of the people. And when I was in France, I went to a town and they showed this city square, this city block that was enclosed by houses. Not enclosed by houses, enclosed by buildings, okay? I guess they were houses. Really large houses that completely enclosed the city square. And they talked about how during the Black Plague, they were piled 10 feet high with dead bodies. And the Black Plague killed 80% of the people in that community, which was contrary to the way that I had thought when I was a kid, that it would be about a third of all the towns. And I suspect a lot of you guys see that too, you know, and that's a misperception. That was a real takeaway I learned, which I applied to other parts of history, that when you hear that there are these terrible wars and so many people were killed, it isn't evenly distributed. Can you guys go with me on that? Does that make sense? Which makes it really interesting sometimes for reasons I will explain. So there are really three things that I think we can learn about this pandemic from American history. So I want you to understand that history does not repeat itself. Now, I might have said that once before, but I want you to really understand that. People say history repeats itself. Every plague, every pandemic, every war, all of these challenges are unique. They aren't exactly like another. Having said that, we can talk about some sense of the experience, and that's what I really want to frankly delve into with you gentlemen right now. Probably the first big event in the United States history was the American Revolution. And I'm going to go through 4 of the big events. The first is the American Revolution. Does anyone know how long the American Revolution lasted? By the way, let me just state that John Adams said that by the time 1776 rolled around, the American Revolution had already happened. That was in the hearts and the minds of the people. And so the American Revolution was passed in 1776. And so you can also argue that the American Revolution continues today, that we are part of the American Revolution and that we're part of the American experiment. So in a real sense, as long as each generation tries to give their children a more free, a more prosperous, and a more inclusive country, in that sense, the revolution continues. Would you agree? So what we're going to limit ourselves to is this period of time of the American Revolutionary War, that we were in a fight with England, and that's what people usually mean. How long did that last? Can anyone just tell me, how long did the American Revolution last? Yes, Court.
I believe it lasted 15 years.
Wow, that would be a pretty horrible situation. Ben?
5 years, I think.
You know, actually, you guys, it's in the middle there. The length of the American Revolution was 7 years. Now, the last major battle was Yorktown, and George Washington didn't get word by the time things went back to England. First of all, George Washington didn't believe the war was over after the Battle of Yorktown. And it could have continued, but Parliament was tired of pouring money into it, so they just cut their losses. But it took about a year for George Washington to learn that the war had ended and that England was throwing in the towel. But the thing I want you to understand is during the American Revolution, they, first of all, weren't always sure they were going to win. Out of the 7 battles George Washington was in, he only won 2 and he lost 5, okay? And so there were times when there was serious doubt as to whether this thing was going to be pulled off. But during the period of the American Revolution, did they know when it was going to end? Like, I look back and say the American Revolution was from 1776 to 1783, 7 years. They did not have that ability to look while they were living through the middle of it and know when it was going to end. Do you see that? Would that not cause them a great deal of anxiety, not knowing when it was going to end? Put your thumbs up if you understand what I said. And you agree with me? Okay, you guys get that. Ryan, you got to put your hand up over a little higher. Okay, there you go. So I want to show you guys now to give you an idea of the challenges of the American Revolution. Let's take a look at that because there's some really good stuff I have on that. Now everybody can, okay, see can everybody hear? Okay, here we go. Now I want you to look at this.
So what is it Mr. Hancock requires of me?
We'd like your advice.
Well, if he is in need of legal advice, I will speak to him. But if this is yet again an exercise to win me over to your side...
It's business, John. The dock, the Eleanor, the Beaver. Just in. Their holds full of tea. All British ships. The King demands that their cargo be unloaded. Cargo in which we, the citizens of Boston, must pay a new tax.
Subject to arrest! You will not land this cargo, gentlemen.
This is legitimate cargo. Tea from the East India Company that you are bound by law to unload.
What's legitimate about it, friend? No other tea is allowed in Boston Harbor. Either we drink the King's foul brew or nothing at all.
And who may you be, sir?
John Hancock, ship owner.
Not John Hancock, smuggler?
Watch your words, sir. I'm an honest man being strangled by monopoly.
Shame on you, sir!
Shame on you! Shame on you! Shame on you! Sir, teach him a lesson!
illegal act to enforce a political principle, Sam? Answer me that, can you?
Okay, could you guys hear that?
Yeah, a little bit. Who got beat up? Was it John Hancock or the captain of the ship that had?
That was the captain of the ship, and John Hancock is the one who confronted him. Okay, now why did I show that to you? Because at your age, unfortunately, you guys are taught what I call a Disneyland history for the most part. And I want you to see that there's a component of history that is very brutal and dark. Now, I'm not going to tell you the answer to that. I've shared with you guys that the most interesting questions are the ones there are not answers to. The definition of terrorism is to use fear or force to achieve a political end. Were those people putting tars and feathers on him, the Sons of Liberty? Would you say that definition applies to them?
Question again.
Force? Huh?
Question again.
What the question is again? Okay, terrorism is defined as using fear or force to achieve a political end. Isn't that exactly what the Sons of Liberty who poured tar and feathers on that ship merchant were doing, using fear and force to achieve a political end, which is make him return the tea? I'm just sharing that thought with you, okay? And I share that not to be critical, because I'm so glad that they did what they did. But after seeing that, would it surprise you that a lot of the founding fathers were not really excited about the American Revolution and leading these people? So guys like Washington and Benjamin Franklin was a Johnny-come-lately. He came on board the American Revolution at the very end. Can you see how there were some really responsible, fine men who recoiled, and some of them just stayed with the British, who just simply didn't want to embrace that kind of violence if that's what it took to break with England? Does that make sense? And I'm not, of course, I have to tell you that my ancestors went with the British, okay? They were driven off to Canada afterwards, but I am so glad that they lost. I'm so glad my ancestors lost. But I share that with you because I think in sharing with you the brutality sometimes of history, it really makes it more interesting. And I'm glad there aren't any girls here, because I can say that. Does that, especially to young men, doesn't that kind of make history even more interesting? To know that it's not like Disneyland, it doesn't have this sprinkling of Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck on it like you do it from Disneyland, although it's really pretty brutal sometimes. Ben, you have your hand up for something?
There are girls here.
Where? I don't see them. Oh, they're in the class? Oh, I'm glad you said that. Oh, I didn't see that. I'm going to have to try to get you guys. Oh, okay. Okay, now there are. I'm glad to know that. I didn't know there were so many of you. Good morning. Well, you guys could hear all that, okay? Now, I said that the American Revolution lasted about 7 years from the time of the Declaration of Independence. Actually, it started in 1775 with Concord and Lexington, and then it ended with the Battle of Yorktown. If I told you, what is the biggest frustration that the people had living through that at the time? What was the biggest frustration? Can you guys jump in and tell me?
Everybody was like owned under England, and they wanted to be free from England.
Okay. I told you that today we look back and I can tell you the dates of when it started and when it was ended. Did they know that while they were living through it?
Nah.
Wouldn't that cause an enormous amount of anxiety in their lives?
Yes.
Okay, good. Now, I'm going to talk to you about the next great event in American history, okay? And that is the Civil War, the American Civil War. Now, can anyone throw out, do you remember when the American Civil War was?
1777.
Anybody else? 1777 would be a year after the Declaration of Independence. When was the American Civil War? Okay, Keenan, just pipe in. If anybody knows, just unmute and tell us.
1865.
Yeah, it was 1861 to 1865. Okay, now, let me tell you about what happened. The American Civil War saw almost 1 million people die, okay? When the population then was much smaller than it is today, about 1/9 of what we are today, almost 1 million people were killed, okay? In fact, 3% of the American population was killed in the Civil War. Are you guys listening to me? Now, 3% of the American population died in the Civil War. That wasn't a foreign country coming in and killing us. That was Americans doing that to Americans in America, okay? 3%. That would be approximately 1 out of 30. Let's compare that with the pandemic in New York, New Jersey. How many people died in New Jersey proportionately? And you guys, you could probably look it up on your computers, but I want you to listen to me. 1 out of 2,500 people died in New Jersey from COVID. About 1 out of 30 people died in the Civil War, American Civil War. Now, what that makes it even, so we're talking about 1 out of 30 in the Civil War, 1 out of 2,500 in New York, which was the hotbed. New York was, my wife's aunt died of COVID a month ago, okay? So I know somebody who had it. I know somebody who died from it, okay? She was 99 years old. Do you have a question, Court?
Did she die from COVID or with COVID?
From COVID. She died
so
from
just COVID, or did she have like cancer?
Okay, I'm going to answer that. She was 99 years old, okay? She possibly would have lived another year, another 2 years, okay? So she died from COVID, but it took off maybe a year or two, okay? So the Civil War, when these people died, the average age of a soldier was about 25. So the average age of people dying from COVID is about 80. The average age dying in the Civil War was about 25. So we see there's a difference there. 1 out of 30 in the Civil War, 1 out of 2,500 of COVID. But that's only in the hotspots in New York. It's a lot less than that. It's like 1 out of 10,000, 1 out of 20,000, something like that. It's a lot less. But so we see there's a difference, but there is a similarity in this sense. When you go back and you look at the speeches of Abraham Lincoln, when you look at the letters that are written then, when you look at the newspapers, what do you think the source of real anxiety was of the people living through the Civil War? What was the source of real anxiety? Yes.
It could have lasted centuries.
We look back, and I sit here and tell you that the Civil War lasted from 1861 to 1865. Did they know that when they were living through the Civil War?
No.
They had real questions at the beginning as to which side was going to win, but they didn't know when it was going to end. You know what? I'm going to share with you guys, in fact, to show you the brutality of the Civil War, because I want you guys to see this. And appreciate the brutality of the Civil War in a really powerful way, I think. Here it is. Look at this. This is from the movie Gone with the Wind. It's really powerful. Okay, now, you guys could all hear that, right? And see that? What struck you? Tell me, somebody pipe in and just tell the rest of us. What did you learn from that?
Millions of people died.
Well, it really, that was the
Not millions, but like thousands.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, you saw the brutality, but that's really what it was like. That was very close. That movie was only made about a half century after the Civil War had ended, maybe 80 years, 60 years, 65 years after the Civil War ended. But it was pretty accurate. If you'd been there, it would be like that. It was so brutal, and that was a huge battle, the Battle of Atlanta, that the Confederacy lost. So you see the horror these people lived through. Now, I have to tell you something else. Two things that are about the Civil War. Do you like this? Do you like to learn about history like this and hit these high points? Yeah, a lot of you do. Okay. This in the North, 1 out of 10 soldiers were killed. 1 out of 10 young men, 1 out of 10 young men of military age were killed in the North. In the South, 1 out of 3 white men of military age was killed. 1 out of 3 white men of military age in the South was killed. 1 out of 10 in the North. Now, that was not evenly distributed, and here's why. The Civil War, the armies would fight in battalions, they'd fight in companies, they'd fight in platoons. A company has about 100 men, okay? A platoon has about 16, 20, has about 20 men. Why is it, and I'm asking all of you this, why is it that they would fight young men from the same town? Why would they go in fighting shoulder to shoulder? Why was that a useful strategy for both armies to have the young men who had grown up together fighting together?
Because they're friends and they knew that they wouldn't kill each other.
They're friends and they're depending on each other, and they also knew that their buddies that they're fighting with are going to be writing letters home and telling the people back home what kind of soldiers they were, whether they were cowards, whether they fought bravely. So you would have a better army if you had these people who knew each other and were accountable to each other, right? Does that make sense? Now, this really had some negative consequences, as we shall see. Because in places like Antietam, at the cornfield at Antietam, where almost everybody was fighting in this cornfield was cut down. At Gettysburg, in the wheat field, there were places at Bloody Angle, they called it, at Sharpsburg. And they had these battles that were just terrific, where sometimes a company or a platoon, a battalion of young men from a particular town were all killed. Okay, so just like the Black Plague, which killed 80% of some towns and didn't touch other towns in Europe, the Civil War was especially tragic because after the war, you might go to some communities, some towns, particularly in the South, and there might be no young men between the ages of 20 and 40. They just don't exist. They were all killed in some battle. Does that make sense? Okay, so I'm going to go back and ask all of you this question. We look back and we look at the Civil War and say it was from 1861 to 1865. What kind of anxiety would they have? Did they know that when the Civil War was going to end? What do you think? So
No, they didn't.
Okay, you're going through a pandemic now. Do you know when this pandemic's going to end? Does anybody know? Nobody knows. I don't care what the president says. I don't care what the doctors say. I don't care what your parents say. I don't care what anyone says. Nobody knows when this is going to end. Okay? Now, does that help you to appreciate the anxiety of those who lived through the American Revolution? To appreciate the anxiety of those who lived through the American Civil War? Hello? Put your thumbs up if you hear that. they were filled with anxiety. Now, I'm not through with the story, okay? The next great transformative event was my parents' generation. When my father was 17 years old, he never graduated from college because of this event. He looked upon a country that had just been shattered by a horrible economic depression. And that economic depression lasted for 12 years. And my father and his family were very proud that they did not lose the family farm during that time, and they had enough food to eat, okay? But to give you an idea of the poverty for 12 horrible long years that impacted this country, when World War II started right after the Depression, 30% of the young men who applied to fight had been so emaciated. Many of those, some of them just had physical problems otherwise, but many of those men had not been given enough nutrition because of the Depression. They didn't get enough food, that they had rickets and they had other results of malnourishment that they couldn't enlist and fight in World War II. That gives you an idea of how horrible the Depression was. Now, when they were in the middle of this horrible long depression that lasted much longer than anyone had anticipated, I look back and I can tell you that it really lasted from about January 1930. It actually technically began October of 1929, but the Depression really started January of 1930, and it essentially ended January of 1942. Now, do all of you appreciate that while they're living through this horrible time, they didn't know when it was going to what?
End.
They didn't know when it was going to end. Now, they thought that might be the new normal. They thought that this is just the way the world was going to be from now on. And I'll tell you at the end of it how horrible this was and what that generation endured. What ended the Great Depression? Does anybody know what ended the Great Depression? I'll tell you. The Japanese ended it. December 7th, 1941, the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, and that ended the Great Depression. So you can say thank you, Japanese, for ending the Great Depression. But it started a new problem. And what was that?
World War II.
World War II. Now, did Americans know when did Americans know when World War II was going to end? So as we slogged across Europe, did they know that in August of 1945 we would have a nuclear bomb, that we would deliver 2 of those over Japan and end the war? They never knew that, did they? So, can you understand? And I got another layer to this that you're going to appreciate. Can you guys appreciate the enormous anxiety they felt as World War II ground on? That they didn't know when it was going to end. Hello? Now, here's the other kicker for you, okay? I told you that they were living through this 12-year depression, right? Then they go into World War II and they're on a wartime economy. There's basically no unemployment. The depression's over. Everybody who wants to work can work. What were they terrified about that would happen after World War II ended? If you were living like my parents' generation through World War II, what would your biggest fear be when the war ended? Hello?
Two of which things. The first one is you didn't know when it was going to end, and the second one is once this world war has ended, there could have been a Cold War after, which could have led to another world war.
You know, I'm really glad you're trying to think, but I want you to put yourself in their shoes for a moment, okay? You've just lived through a 12-year depression where people are unemployed and trying to figure out a way to feed their families. The college deans, when this happened, were trying to figure out how to keep their students from starving, okay, at colleges. We get through this period of 12 years because of World War II. What are they terrified is going to happen afterwards? And don't think in terms of a Cold War.
I know. The government is going to give money to more troop supplies, and there's not going to have enough money to have food.
Aren't you afraid that we're going to slip back into a depression? Remember, after 12 years of a depression, they'd think that was normal. And so they were terrified that we would go back after World War II to a depression. Does that make sense? Hello? Put your thumbs up if you agree with that.
Yes.
Now, if you're logical and you're living through that experience that I just said, 12 years of a depression, you're pushing through a war, you're going to be terrified. This is a false economy. This World War II thing that we're in now, where everybody's working, is a false economy. And once this war ends, oh, we're going to win the war. I might say that unlike previous wars, I think that World War II, there was a great deal of confidence that we were going to prevail. But that wasn't the terror not winning. The terror they faced was, are we going to slide back into a depression? You guys get that? So we have the advantage of 2020 hindsight that we look back and we say, no, it was a time of, they had some fits and starts, but basically it was pretty economically successful. We pushed on and created a better country, a more prosperous country. Does everybody get that? And now I'm going to wind this up and we'll take a break. Now, what is it that would really, can you guys understand the anxiety these people experienced in the American Revolution, in the American Civil War, in World War II, in the Great Depression? Can you understand what was their anxiety derived from? The fact they didn't what? Hello? Look at me, you guys. Look into your cameras. I want everybody to look at me. Tell me, what is it? And you can type it in or you can unmute and tell me. What was it that we can understand, that we can relate to about Americans who struggled through these trying, difficult times that we can relate to in terms of their experience? They had a great deal of anxiety. Why?
Because they didn't know when because there might have been another depression. And they
didn't know when it was going to end. They didn't know when this thing was going to end. Now, let me just go back and tell you this about the Depression, and that is there were millions of women who didn't get married because of the Great Depression, and they didn't have children. And then World War II came, and they didn't get married or have children because the young men were going off to war. And after the war, it took a while for us to get through that dysfunctionality. So this country was very dysfunctional for about 20 years. And you know, women are created to want children, which is normal for women to want children. God's made them that way. And if you were a woman born in the wrong year, you might hit the period of years of fertility if it was the Great Depression. And by the time America's back into normal, you're too old to have children. Does that make sense? Does that make you feel a sense of tragedy that a lot of Americans felt because of this dysfunctionality? Okay, I'm going to wind it up now. I'm going to wind it up, and then we're going to go in a minute. Do you guys, am I successful in helping you connect to the anxiety felt by previous American generations?
Yes.
Oh, you guys are all saying yes. Thank you so much. Should we be anxious?
And this time, no, not really. I don't think so. Because God has a plan for us.
And you know what? That's exactly right. Jesus Christ rose from the dead, sits at the right hand of the Father. He loves us, and he's directing our paths. Even though we can't see them, we don't know when this is going to end. And if people, if you guys felt anxiety, I want you to know that's normal, and Americans have felt that before. But at the end of the day, we know that God's in charge. And a lot of times he doesn't do things exactly the way I would do them, because I wouldn't have brought this on. But I'm not God, and he does it his way, and he does it the right way. And so that's really, we need to cast our cares on him. And that's the lesson that we learn from this. But also recognize, I hope that you've learned that these past generations of Americans have faced enormously difficult challenges. And I do think out of that lesson, we can learn the anxiety they felt. If you walked away today saying, you know, I really can understand the anxiety they felt in a way I didn't understand before. Do you get that? Thank you. We'll see you in we'll take a 5-minute break. Thank you.